Okay, we will go ahead and get started now. I do want to remind everyone to put themselves on mute if you can, and I may mute you manually, especially if you're on the phone and you can't mute, just to let you know. I want to welcome everyone to the Accessibility Resources webinar that's sponsored by Maryland Online. Deb Dorsey, who is an assistant professor of health at Harford Community College, has generously agreed to share her slides and the recording of this session. So you'll get information about that. This is one of a series of webinars that Maryland Online presents, and you'll all be on the mailing list, email list for this. Just ask me, shoot me an email and let me know if you do not want to be on that list. You can take yourself off at any time. Please put your questions as we go along in the chat, and I will try to pause at various times with Deb to ask your questions rather than try to have everyone talk at once. And if you would like to present with the Maryland Online series or have a particular topic you're interested in, please go ahead and email me. Now, I do want to say one more thing about Deb. If you do not know, yes, she is a professor, but I also have to say that she's done a tremendous amount of research in accessibility. You have probably one of the best experts in the state on accessibility, not just accessibility in courses, but in online courses, which is very important. More recently, Deb has done a lot of research and presentations on accessibility and open educational resources, which the Kerwin Center has actually tapped her to present a few times, and she's presented other places, and she's always willing to help Maryland Online out in this area, because I do consider her probably one of the premier experts in the state. So without further ado, I'm going to turn my camera off and share the spotlight with Deb and let her take it away. Go ahead, Deb.
I do promise you that I have a full face right now. The lighting is a little strange in here, and so I won't keep the camera on me for very long. But again, thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. I am assistant professor of health here at Harford Community College, and over the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years, I've sort of gotten more into, if that's the right word, accessibility and how to make things accessible to all people. And so today, what I'm going to do is talk mostly about externally linked content and not about self-generated content. So Microsoft Word documents, PowerPoint, not really going to talk about that today. However, and I'm going to give a little plug here, if you are interested in that, we do have some workshops coming up called Fix It. And if you are interested, you're welcome to email me or to email Wendy about that information. So a couple things before we get started. I am in a new office, and it's great, but it also has a bathroom sort of just on the other side. And so, which has a loud flush. Now, I have put a sign up on the bathroom door, hoping that folks will maybe use a different bathroom, but this could end up being sort of unintentionally hilarious. So we will see what happens. I'm also going to be switching back and forth between screens, and so just bear with me if there's sort of like a brief delay between PowerPoint slide and the web. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn myself off for now, and we'll switch gears, and hopefully everyone can see the slide, which is accessibility resources. And I'm going to go through and first talk a little bit about why accessibility is important in an online setting. And so when we look at our content, we have to think about the person who's on the opposite side of us. And so what we're looking for is, can people with alternative abilities perceive the content that we're showing? Can they use it? Can they grasp it? And can they access it? Now, this is example. This is sort of a human example of WCAG standards. And hopefully you have heard that term utilized before. We are going to focus today primarily on perception, perceivable, and operable. Understandable means when I look at something, I can understand the language. Accessible refers a bit more to that your content can hold up across different types of devices, computers, mobile, and that sort of thing. But again, we're going to focus mostly on the WCAG standards that I think are probably most applicable to those of us in higher ed teaching online. And so again, what perceivable means is that if I have an alternate ability to perceive or take in information, that my site or the content that I'm delivering can be perceivable. And that's not just strictly from the student, but also robots. And basically what that means is that people's assistive technology can perceive the content, and that alternatives are given if a user cannot use one of their senses. And then as far as operable goes, they sort of go hand in hand, but what this means is that your content is set up so that a person who utilizes or navigates through a website using some type of assistive technology is able to do that. And so the first thing that I'm going to talk a little bit about is time-based media. And so it's a fancy word for video and for audio. And when we look at WCAG standards, WCAG says all video must be captioned and all audio must be transcribed. Now, I will refer to WCAG frequently, but there's also 508, which is, at this point, they're very similar in terms of what they want in your content, the accessibility that, or levels of accessibility that they expect. Time-based media, there's a transcript if need be, it's in the correct sequence, and there's a means for achieving outcomes of any time-based interaction. Basically what that means, the achieved outcome is being able to understand the time-based media. So, navigate through here, there we go. So what I'm going to do in a few seconds here is show you YouTube video. I'm going to show you two different types of captioning. So the first will be auto captioned, and it's a step. There are some issues with auto captioned videos. Under good conditions, they have about an 80% accuracy. Good conditions means that the person has spoken clearly, that there's no other sound interference, and that is not always the case. Under bad conditions, 50% is accurate. And of course, that's not good, as particularly if we're showing video that we want our students to understand and we're going to assess them on it. And the other part about auto caption, there's never punctuation. And so again, that can be difficult for a person to be able to perceive. The other thing that I'll show you then, the second example, are subtitles and closed captions on YouTube. And I think the best way to describe this is that this is intentional. The person who created the video has intentionally provided accurate closed captioning. And that's either done CIY, caption it yourself, or by a professional company that that's what they do. They caption video for a living. And so we're going to shift gears a little bit here. I'm going to show you the difference between these two things. Okay, so hopefully here, everyone is able to see. Oh, let's try that again. So share and share. There we go. And I'll just ask Wendy to confirm that you're able to see it switched screens. We're just going to go with it that it has. And so what I've done in the first site is I'm going to do a search, health behavior. And when I go through and I look at my different, by the way, health behavior is one of the courses that I teach. And when I go through these, I can see there's a lot of different options. And the first thing that you're going to notice, hopefully, is that under certain ones, there's CC, and others there aren't. Now, if you didn't know better, you might click on this one and say, well, wait a minute. Silent on that, the sound. If you didn't know better, you would say, well, wait a minute, it does say closed captioned here. But again, these are auto captioned. And you can tell, right? Because there's no punctuation, there's no capitalization, and that sort of thing. So if I did the same, and I went to health behavior, and I did, a lot of people don't realize there's a filter right here that I can go in and say, well, wait a minute, I want to look for all videos that are closed captioned. Select that. Now you can see that the only video that is showing all have these closed captions underneath of them. And if we compare the two, there's a whole bunch that are missing now, including the one that I initially showed and throughout here. So again, then the benefit is that if I show this video,
welcome to the Understanding Health-Related Behavior,
that this person has intentionally captioned the video. And again, you can tell very clearly there's capitalization, some of the more technical terminology is spelled correctly. We tend to see this as being more important in the sciences because we have Latin words that we use to describe anatomy and physiology and that sort of thing. So again, the way that you would check this is very simple. When you've done your search and you've got all of your different results, if you go up to the filter and you select subtitles closed captioned, that's when you're going to get the best quality of a captioned video in YouTube. And at the time that I last checked, Vimeo didn't have a great way of filtering these things, but oftentimes your library will, when you use your search from your library resource, there is also a way to filter through that. Everyone has a different search engine. Their library uses a different resource. And so I tend not to show that, only because if I show you the one that Harford uses, it may not be meaningful to you. So I'm going to go ahead again and switch my screen. Okay. And again, hoping that everybody is back on the presentation or the PowerPoint presentation. And so the next thing I'm going to talk about, and we already took a look at our YouTube, and we also talked about utilizing the filters. And so the next thing that I'm going to talk about and show a few examples of are images. And the images are important. We use them all the time. They make our text more engaging, and they can convey complex information. The trick with images is whether or not there is alternative text. And with alternative text, there's two things. The first is semantic meaning. So I am in words explaining what this picture means. But there's also context. Not all alternative text is going to be created equal. And occasionally there is absolutely no alternative text for the student to see. And so I'm going to show you a tool that I use. It's called Totally. It's by Khan Academy, and it's a bookmarklet. There is, when we share slides, there is a link on the Totally website that will take you through the instructions of installing it on your toolbar. But I am going to be utilizing it, and you'll be able to see it in action. And what Totally does is it will show you how a student that is using a screen reader will perceive your content. And that includes not only text, but also alternative text for images. I'm going to go ahead and switch again. And we're going to take a look. The thing about context, it's very important. Again, if you're going to assess your students' understanding of an image, it's going to be very important that that image provides the context that you wish for them to know. And so up here you can see the bookmarklets. There's totally. I'm also going to go over HTML sniffer in just a few minutes as well. But when I click on totally, and there's these little sunglasses that come up, you can see it's got a lot of different things that you can check on a website. I'm not really going to go over these first because what I really want for you to be able to see is screen reader. So if I select this, you can see that there's a nice little window box that comes in. And if I put my cursor over the different pictures, it will tell you what this picture means. Now, here we have George Washington, circa 1796, after Gilbert Stuart's Lansdowne portrait. Now, that may be important. Depending on what you're teaching, you're going to want your students to know that this is a portrait under this context. But if I go into a very similar website, and again, I use totally, you can see portrait of George Washington. So if I wanted my students to be able to understand the meaning or the context of this picture, this alternative text may not give them what they need in order to be able to convey to you their understanding, which of course is an issue, right? We want our students to be successful. So again, this is a nice little tool that you can use. It can also help you to identify when an image absolutely does not have any alternative text. And I'm going to show you a couple examples of that as well. Okay. And again, I did put the hyperlinks into the presentation so that you can always refer back to George Washington. Oh, of course, you know, the big topic right now is open education resources. And, you know, in the same way as any kind of externally linked content, you want for that content to be perceivable. And so I'm going to show you one that's good. It's OpenStax. And I can't say that universally OpenStax is always going to be accessible. They've done a better job lately. Then I'm going to show you one that's not so good. So again, let's go ahead and switch. And we'll start off with OpenStax. And this is an astronomy course, an astronomy textbook. And I'm going to go in, I'm going to use totally again to see, is it telling me what those images are? And this one's pretty good, right? So if I put my cursor over that picture, it gives me a lot of really good information about what this particular picture is about. But I switch gears and go to a different OER, and this one is about, sort of ironically, stress management, and I go through this one, not so good. So I'm going to again use my screen reader, and you can see there is no text visible for this particular image. And that could be a problem. For example, if I was saying, you know, what are the common expressions or that a student who is under stress would, what would we see? You know, of course, that would be an issue because I don't understand the correct context. Now, there's some other things that we can look at as well in terms of perceivable content. And again, for the open education resources, these are links and you will be able to go in and see them. The other thing that I'm going to show you is HTML code sniffer. And again, this is really great for websites. At first, when you use it, it can seem intimidating. And part of that is if you really wanted to look deeper into the information it is that it gives you, as you're looking through it, you may say, I have absolutely no idea what this means, because a lot of it's technical. And so what I always tell folks is after you use HTML code sniffer, if there's a lot of red on the page, and you'll understand what that means in just a few seconds, then that is probably not a good resource for you to use. And the fact of the matter is, it's content that you don't own it. And so there's nothing that you can do on an external website to improve its accessibility. And so again, we're going to take a look at the same OERs, and we're going to run them through the HTML checker. And again, this is a bookmarklet that is installed up onto your toolbar. Make sure that I am actually sharing that. And there we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get out of totally. Up here, my HTML code sniffer. And you can see when it runs, there's 25 errors on this page. And again, if you're like, well, I just want to know what those errors are, you can, if you wish, view the report. But again, some of it is not necessarily, as you're looking through it, do I know what has insufficient contrast? Maybe I do, but again, there's not much that I can do about it. This website belongs to this particular company, organization, and I can't really change things. The same with, if I go to the OpenStax astronomy, and I run it through HTML code sniffer. This one, not so bad. It's got one error. That is not a deal breaker, right? If I have one error on the page, probably can live with that. Now, the one thing also that I want to show you is most colleges will hold themselves to WCAG 2AA standards. WCAG actually comes in 3 standards, 3 being the best. That's super strict. But most of us commit to 2AA. So but I also have section 508, which again refers to people with disabilities. And again, if I run that, then I can see that according to section 508, there are 4 errors on the page. But again, that's not a lot, relatively speaking. That if I switch again over to the site that was not super great, and I run the code, there's 25, again, under WCAG 2AA, and there's 4 under section 508. Now, I deliberately put this up here, and the reason being is that at this point, it would be time to make a decision. Okay, is this a good site? I would always encourage you to go off of the WCAG standards. They are more precise, sharper than section 508. Section 508 is slowly bringing themselves up to WCAG 2AA standards. WCAG more often refers to commercial websites. They have, the standards for commercial websites are pretty high. But the standards for higher education should also be really high. And over time, what we're going to find out is that if we were to run HTML code sniffer, eventually what we would find out is that section 508 would be very much like the WCAG standards. Okay, so I'm going to switch back here. All right, and again, another example that I have up is Dartmouth stress management. I didn't show it to you for the sake of brevity, but of course you can go and look at it. It's the same thing when I run my HTML code sniffer. It's not great. And the reason why I use it as an example is that it is an EDU website. And sometimes we make the assumption that an EDU website will be accessible. And it's not the case. typically, and unfortunately, the sites that are accessible are those that the DOJ has said you will make your website accessible. And so not all of them are created equal. In general, your .gov websites are going to be accessible. It's not a hard, fast rule, but typically they are. .org, no, not always. .edu, not always. And .com, hopefully none of us in higher ed use .coms frequently, because we always stress with our students that they're not necessarily a reliable source of information. But .coms also oftentimes they don't fall within standards. And much of that is based on the ability to navigate them, to switch between links. So I'm going to finish up with PDFs. There is a sort of misnomer, I guess, that if it's a PDF, it must be accessible. And unfortunately, that is not true. So I'm going to take the same PDF and I'm going to show it to you in its web source, which is how I found it. I'm also going to show you when I downloaded it and then brought the file. Harford is a Blackboard college, and so I'm going to show you how, when I bring it up into Blackboard, how it looks and how it fares from an accessibility point. And then I'm also going to show you how it fares in Acrobat. I'm going to give a couple caveats here. The first of which is the way that I'm going to show you whether or not it is accessible in Blackboard is that I'm going to use a new tool that we have called Ally. Not all institutions have Ally. I believe it is an add-on for Blackboard. And if you're a Canvas institution, I know that Ally will work, but it's probably a plugin. I can't really speak to some of the other LMS. However, I'm going to show it to you anyway, just so you have a clearer understanding of what the problem will be. The second caveat is Acrobat. If you have ever utilized Acrobat before, or any Adobe product, you probably know that it is not the easiest to utilize. Adobe is what I will often use to determine whether or not a file is accessible, because it has a very robust accessibility checker. However, fixing that PDF becomes more complicated and does require a certain amount of understanding how to use the program and how to improve the accessibility. And it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today. And so I'm not going to go through that part, but I am going to show you how you can use Adobe to make those judgments as to whether or not a PDF is accessible. So again, I'm going to go ahead and shift gears. And this is health behavior. I searched it on the net. You can see it's living up in the net. And my first sort of go-to would be to run it through HTML code sniffer. So I'm going to do that. And wow, at first glance, it looks really good, right? I've got 2 errors showing up in WCAG 2AA. And in section 508, I have none. So I might think, oh, this is great, but it's not. HTML code sniffer does not work as well when you look at PDFs on the web. So I would encourage you to not consider this particular tool to be useful when trying to determine whether or not a web PDF is accessible. Now, that's where Acrobat comes in handy. But first, I'm going to switch and show you that how it would show if you had Ally as part of your LMS. And so anytime I bring a file, so again, I'm not linking it. This is, I've downloaded this file and then I've uploaded into my LMS. It will give me a rating. This is Allie, and it will, if I click here, it'll tell me what's wrong with this PDF. It should. Of course, it's going to go slow right now, right? So the other part I'll show you too is that if I click here, it'll give me an idea of what I need to do to fix it. I think I know what I need to do. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my browser and see if maybe, I know that I've noticed that Blackboard isn't playing as nicely in Chrome as it used to. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you can see what it's telling me is that there are some problems with what I have posted up here, and it's going to suggest that I do certain things. But if I go right here, let's see here, I'm going to go right here. It's also going to give me some understanding of why this is a problem. And it's not a tagged PDF. What that means is if I have a screen reader, I cannot navigate this document. I can't read it at all. Tagging, the best way for me to explain, if you're unfamiliar with that term tagging, is to think about, we've all gone to, I guess, a concert or Disney World where we're trying to park. You've got those people, waving the flags. First, you're supposed to go in this way, then you have another person waving a flag to make a right turn, and so forth. And that's what tagging is in a PDF. It tells a screen reader which way to go through the document so that the person can perceive the information. And if I go down into, I've downloaded this particular PDF as well. I brought it into Adobe. Again, if you wanted to make this PDF accessible, you can do that in Adobe, but you really do need to know what you're doing. But I show it to you just for the sake of understanding how it can be a good accessibility checker. So I have this I have the accessibility tool here. And if I go into full check, it'll run the document through. And then it'll tell me pretty much the same thing that Allie told me, that in the document it is not tagged. There are some other issues. It can't read what language the document is in. It doesn't know the title of the document. There's some other problems as well. See, it's looking at this as a picture. So that's why when you put it through the web source, when you're up here, see how it's thinking that this is a picture? That's why, I go back to the web source, it says, well, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, technically it should say, oh, it's a picture and it has no alternative text, but it can't pick up on the fact that there's, can't read it. It doesn't see the coding in there. And that's what it's looking for, obviously. So I go back here, the other parts of it, tab order failed, and basically that means if a person is using certain operable accessibility equipment or technology to be able to view, it can't tab through the correct way. It's missing all kinds of alternative text. There's some issues with tables that are in here and so forth. It's just a big mess. Now, again, I could run it through and I could fix it, or I could just make that decision, this is not a good resource for me to use. So I'm going to again switch back. And we are back to the PDF. So that's pretty much what I have for everyone today. I think that the takeaway is that there are ways to look for closed captioning in YouTube. And you also really want to be wary of utilizing auto-captioned video. Also, there are some tools out there that can help you to determine if external content is accessible. But when you look at PDFs, You have to put them under a few different lenses, and to know that your HTML checker is not going to accurately tell you whether or not that particular source is accessible. As I said, I will have the slides for you, and will be the links to the two bookmarklets, HTML and Totally. And I think that concludes what I have for you today. I also have my contact information. You're always welcome to contact me, send emails, give a call. There's some additional helpful resources there as well that you may find useful, but please reach out if you do have questions. And now, perhaps you.
Yeah, please put questions in the chat. I just have one little one, but I did want to apologize for not being able to respond to you quick enough. But you had already moved on by the time I had gotten back and unmuted, and then I felt like I would interrupt your flow. So I really did just get up from my desk for a second. But
I figured you would tell me if you came back. You'd say, "Debbie, wait, people can't
exactly.
see."
Exactly. So yes, if people have questions, please put them in. I fear that this is one of those situations where there may not be a lot of questions because you are going to share your slides, and I like the fact that you built in a lot of the resources as links in your slide. So I suspect a lot of people want to go to the slides and try them out. But I did just want to ask a policy question. And this is kind of a speculation, but it applies to everyone, and I'm interested in your thoughts. And that is, right now it seems like it's very uneven as far as policy requirements for institutions. And it probably varies between 4 years and 2 years as well, and whether you're public and private. What do you see on the horizon as far as requiring full accessibility for online courses? Or are we still far away from having that? Because, you know, I imagine the people on this webinar are partly on here because they sense that it is coming, where it's going to no longer be a nicety but a requirement. So I was just interested in your thoughts.
Well, so it is a requirement. It's already here. All of your content that you put up is supposed to be 508 compliant, as well as, you know, we are encouraging folks to also look at the WCAG standards. And so what happens, and we've seen this, I think more recently with Harvard, there was some closed captioning issues, is that if you have a student or a group of students who cannot perceive the information that you're putting up, you as an institution are immediately liable. And so, and we know, and this is not to scare folks, but we do know that there have been cookie cutter lawsuits, is what I call them. And they will, from time to time, you'll find a group that sends out bots that are able to go into an LMS and detect whether or not your content is accessible. And so what I always encourage people to consider is showing good intent. So if you are developing your course and you're putting content in there and you're showing good intent, meaning you're not putting up videos that aren't captioned, you're taking time to determine that your PDFs are accessible, you're looking at the content that you are going to assess your students on, and you're doing your best to make sure that those are accessible, that's going to go a long way. Can it completely cover you? Of course not. You know, people are always allowed to take legal action against you if your content is not accessible. But what we have found is that if you show good intent and the majority of your content is accessible, you're probably going to be okay. The one thing that I also always point out, and again, things have improved now that we have become more vocal about accessibility being important and being mandatory. And some of these things have gotten better, but from time to time, the issue becomes whether or not you are using linked content with a textbook publisher. And some of them have definitely tried to make their things more intentionally accessible, but some of them are not doing such a great job. And so if you have content linked from a textbook publisher and it is not accessible, you are putting your college at risk. The person who decides to take issue with it is not going to go after the publisher. They're going to go after the college because the college made the decision to adopt a resource that was not accessible. From a faculty perspective, which is where I live, the place that I always say start with this is your syllabus. Because if your syllabus is not accessible, then a student who has that need, who has, needs to use a screen reader, has some type of sensory need, they're not going to understand what your class is about. And, you may never know because a lot of times the student will just simply drop your course. The last piece that I'll add to that is that there is a misunderstanding that the only reason or the only time that our content needs to be accessible is if we have a student who has accommodations. And that is absolutely not true. A person does not have to self-disclose that they have a disability in order for you to be liable, because again, above everything else, it's that you must meet those 508 standards. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, it is very interesting because, I think that although it's required, I don't think it's being met. And I think that's kind of part of what your point is. And in other words, not every course is accessible. We know this. And sometimes it's going to just take a lawsuit. But there is a question in the chat from Anne, who, by the way, I have to thank Anne for suggesting this webinar in the first place. And her question is, I've heard different views that as long as the course LMS does not have a student with accommodation, then your weekly update videos to students do not have to be captioned. Is this a misconception? That
is a misconception. Anything that you put up in your course must meet the standards. And the one thing that I always like to stress is that a lot of times a video that you find, if it is not captioned, you probably could search and find a captioned version. Sometimes we take the first, when we do a search, the first search result. And that's where that filter that YouTube has really comes in handy. I did a review. I'm a Quality Matters reviewer. And I did a review for a colleague and who had a video up that was not accessible. And I went and I did a little search, and there was a version of it that was accessible, that was captioned. And so sometimes it's just a matter of, digging a little deeper to see if you can find the identical resource that's captioned, or perhaps you find one that is as good as the one that you wanted to use and it is captioned. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that's good. Once again, I think that's the whole, going back to the other question, which is, it's the misconceptions that are going to get us the lawsuits.
And really, it's just a matter of getting yourself in the practice. This is something that we weren't always sort of told that we needed to do this. And so if you think about anything that you've done, whether it's create a Word document or, create a PowerPoint, at some point, we were all new to that. We had to learn the process and we had to learn how to use the software. And so if you just kind of get in the habit of these important pieces when you go to add the content to your course or create your course, it becomes part of your process of developing your course. It's just a matter of establishing the habit of doing these things.
we have another comment from Kathy, who's actually attending from Quality Matters, and she mentions that Quality Matters has an accessibility and usability resource site that is open to the public. So do check that out. QualityMatters.org. You'll be able to find that. Actually, she put it into the chat if you can see that that link if anyone wants to check that out. Thank you, Kathy.
And there's a lot of great resources out there. I have shown some that they're just sort of my favorite. They're the ones that I like to use, but Quality Matters has some. There are some universities who have some, and these are oftentimes universities, again, where it was mandated that they do this, but you know, they I guess, you know, that the good thing that came out of it is that they're offering resources as well.
Good. Any other questions? If you find something later, send me an email and I can get it over to Deb. And as Deb mentioned, if you want to know more about this, if you feel like might either be concerned about your campus or you simply want more information, we are holding two more accessibility events co-sponsored. Maryland Online and MDLA are co-sponsoring it. One in May 18th and one June 1st. One will be held east and one will be held west. So you have some options, and you can email me for more information about that, or Deb directly. I should put her resources up. Okay. Thank you very much, Deb. This was a lot of information, and for those of you who have signed up, you will get the slides. It may not come until tomorrow, but you'll get the slides so you can click on the links, and you'll get a place to go to for the recording in case you wanted to rewatch or see anything from it. So, thank you so much, everyone.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I saw something flash up. Was there a question that just came up quickly? I saw a number 4 from like the text box.
I'm seeing, thank you. Thanks, Kathy, and thank you. Very helpful, everybody. I don't see, I could be wrong. I don't, yeah.
I'll take praise. That's good.
Yeah. I think that's all I'm seeing. If I did miss somebody's question, please let me know. All right. Thank you, Deb.
Yep, no problem.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.